Hi, this is Trevor Loudon, author of the brand new book, Stealth, Kamala Harris's Communist Roots. You're listening to the Dr. Sky Experience on Talk Radio 77 WABC.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Dr. Sky Experience. Proudly here on Talk Radio 77 WABC. We like to call it the crown jewel of radio, the iconic 77 Talk Radio WABC, beaming out of New York City, the nation, the world, and the cosmos. And in addition to our regular guests from the great realms of science, astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, and musical celebrities and other people, we do talk and believe very strongly in the topic of American exceptionalism. And shifting our gears to that very subject today, a good friend of ours and a guest that I've had many, many times on a popular radio show that I did years ago called A Call to Rights. His name is Trevor Loudon, and here's a brief introduction. Trevor Loudon is an author, filmmaker, and public speaker from Christchurch, New Zealand. For more than 30 years, he has researched radical left, Marxist, and terrorist movements and their covert influence on mainstream politics. Trevor Loudon's theory is that what is commonly regarded as mainstream political policy is in fact driven and guided by hidden subversive elements. Loudon believes that these forces must be exposed and countered as America's continued role as a bastion of freedom and how pivotal that is for the future of Western civilization. Trevor, good afternoon and welcome to the Dr. Sky Experience. It's been a long time, my friend. How are you today?
It has. It's great to catch up, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're curious about this man, let me just let him do the speaking in this, because that's what the sign of a good interviewer is. To be a listener, not just a talker. And I want to thank our producer, Richard Dugan, for making all this happen. But Trevor, you're the author of so many books, and the one that I have here in my hand that I've always cherished, and I mean this sincerely, is one of the first editions of The Enemies Within, Communists, Socialists, and Progressives in the U.S. Congress. And we sure learned so much from that particular book. So tell us, the evolution of this whole concept and this whole passion for you, how did this all get started? Because it's a long story, I'm sure.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it started in New Zealand, my home country, when the Marxists basically destroyed our military alliance with the United States back in the 80s. And I got to meet, while I was campaigning against that, I got to meet, because I'm very pro-American, as most New Zealanders are. I got to meet a New Zealander who had infiltrated our Communist Party, our pro-Soviet Communist Party, for our security services. He was a government spy inside the communists. And he trained in Moscow in 1983 at the Lenin School with 3,500 students. And what he taught me was this: what you see coming out of the New Zealand Labour Party, the British Labour Party, the Canadian Liberal Party, and the American Democratic Party is all driven by the communist movement. So how it works is the communists come up with a plan. It might be open borders. It might be fracking bans. It might be a nuclear deal with Iran. It might be socialized healthcare. And the unions make it, and the communists make it union policy because they control all the major unions in America, and the unions make it Democrat policy. So that's why you got all these extreme policies under Obama and Biden, because they were following the communist line on open borders, etc., the destruction of the energy industry, etc., because there's hardly a Democrat in the country that isn't elected with union help, and they do what the unions tell them, and the communists tell the unions what to do. That's how communism is being implemented in America.
Well, you know, Trevor, this is interesting. I learned a lot from that particular book we just spoke about. And obviously, you know this better as the author of this, and how you repel it like an anti-gravity force. As you write in the book, in the first book we're talking about, communism's big secret is methodology. And the process is what? First, socialize the entire planet under government central control by force. And you have these three steps. Step one, policy formation. Step two, indoctrination. And step three, implementation. So from New Zealand all the way across the planet, there's nothing new about the topic of communism. But I have to ask you this. Isn't it true, in your opinion, that so many Americans are so, how do I say this, lacking in the knowledge of where this whole other force, the communist and socialist mentality, comes from? I mean, that's why we're doing this, to educate people. But isn't it a shame that so many people simply do not understand the problematic thing with socialism and communism?
Well, that is true, and because unfortunately, one of the very first things the communists began to do after World War II was to infiltrate the journalism colleges. Their Marxist professor, Curtis McDougall, came up with the idea of advocacy journalism. You don't report the news, you shape the news. And so you had a whole generation of liberal left-wing journalists who've been covering for the communists since the 1940s. And so therefore the American public is hugely in the dark about this. And when we saw the so-called collapse of communism and when the Soviet Union went down, there was even less attention on it. But what has happened, the Chinese have taken over, and now communism is more powerful and more prevalent in America than at any time in our history. And it's behind almost all of our negative phenomenon, from open borders to this destruction of the energy industry, the left-wing drift of Hollywood and the Democratic Party. That's all driven by communists, particularly pro-Chinese communists.
Well, Trevor, this is interesting. I think if I'm right on this, please help us out. You know much more about it. Here in America, there's an organization, if I have it correct, the Confucius Institute. Is that also, as we're talking about penetrating into schools, into all the different colleges, and even into communities?
Well, look, even high schools have them sometimes. The Confucius Institute is an organization set up by the Chinese Communist Party. They have them all over colleges, all over America, even high schools, and they promote the Chinese Communist Party line under the guise of teaching history. But the problem is, because so much money goes with these things, if you have one of them on your campus, you will not employ any academic who stands against China, because that could jeopardize the funding that comes from the Confucius Institute. So they're Trojan horses in campuses all over the country, and they have their tentacles go right out into the community.
Amazing. Let's talk a little bit about this. But first, I want to remind all of our listeners, you're here on the Dr. Sky Experience in our American exceptionalism mode, as we talk about different scholars, different authors who talk about subjects that are near and dear to truth, justice, and the American way. Today, our very special friend and guest, Trevor Loudon, an author of so many books. He's a filmmaker. His book that we started the conversation How We Met, was a book entitled The Enemies Within, Communist Socialists and Progressives in the U.S. Congress. But let's talk about this in the brief time we have here. The origins of the Communist Party in the United States are far and wide. I mean, many people may not realize this. Help us out. It goes back, not only into the previous century, but I'm sure even other tentacles back in history. Help us out.
Yeah, like, Horace Greeley, go west, young man. He was one of the early Marxists in America. The Marxists were heavily involved, because when Karl Marx's the followers of Karl Marx tried to stage a revolution in Germany in 1848, and it failed. And thousands of German Marxists fled to the United States and set up in Milwaukee and Chicago. And you had socialist mayors in Milwaukee for decades. And in Chicago, they founded the Communist Party there. So the roots of American communism go right back to the 1840s.
Wow. That's incredible, Trevor. I mean, so many things that people need to learn about and do their homework. And again, we don't always believe everything we read on the internet, but yourself and many other authors of books like this. That's why we continue to talk about subjects like this. Let's go back briefly to the unions. And we read about Cesar Chavez, as many described him, not my words per se, but many things you'd read about, and hero of the socialist communists, a community organizer. I didn't realize this, trained by Saul Alinsky. And that connection is somewhat troubling. Expound on that for people who may not understand what the motivation was behind this whole thing with Cesar Chavez?
Look, Cesar Chavez set up the a big community group in California, in Los Angeles, that basically is one of the main reasons why, part of the reason why Los Angeles is now a bastion of the left. So he was always working with the communists. He wasn't strictly a communist, but he had communists all around him. And I've actually got a letter written by a communist from San Francisco to Cesar Chavez and several of his friends, asking on behalf of the Soviet consulate in San Francisco, this was 1975, for Cesar Chavez to find promising young Latino activists who would go to Moscow and train at the Patrice Lumumba School in Moscow to come back to America and agitate for the splitting of the southwestern states away from America and returning them to Moscow, returning to Mexico. So this was Cesar Chavez, who's taught in schools all over America, cooperating with the Soviet Union to start a revolution in the southern states of the United States. He was 100% in bed with the communists if he wasn't a party member himself.
Wow. Interesting. You know, we talk locally here in Arizona, where I'm broadcasting from, but all around the nation here and around the world on Talk Radio 77 WABC. I followed the career of a then, and I believe, present Congressman Rahul Grijalva here in Arizona. And your book expounds on things that I really never knew, and his connection to La Raza. But a quote here that from the La Raza organization, which is really powerful and impacting to all people, quote, "For the race, everything; outside the race, nothing," end quote. Radical organizations that we find many people in the Congress and the Senate. And now, as we move on to some of your other books, I want people to know you're not a one-author book, and you're also a filmmaker, other than The Enemies Within. How about Burn This Book, the Keith Ellison story, the Attorney General of Minnesota, White House Red.
He would be Kamala Harris's Attorney General if she wins the election.
Wow. Well, this is interesting. And, you know, I want to try to be fair in all the interviews here, but really, truly, common sense rules, because many people know this, and I don't need to remind them. Your points and commentary are so valuable here on this subject to open our minds to what these forces of the dark might necessarily be stronger than we think. The big issue, I think, here in this election boils down to this: immigration, the economy, and national security. Now, I also know, Trevor, that you're also what? A new book by yourself as author on Kamala Harris. And talk a little bit about her, because we need to hear this. And again, I don't want to just stand here and say, you know, you have to love Trump for everything he does. Obviously, people can make up their minds. But if you're a believer in freedom of what's going on here in America, the new way forward sounds like something from a Marxist playbook just on its own, version. If you read history, tell us about that book on Kamala Harris and the dangers that you might foresee that election, which is less than 2 weeks away, as we're doing the interview. What do people know, and what does your research tell us from your expanded knowledge of her and her platforms?
Kamala Harris is a cradle communist. Both of her parents were hardcore Marxists. She's worked with Marxists from elementary school age, through college, through her affair with the Marxist, the pro-communist mayor of San Francisco. She is part of the Chinese Communist Party power elite in San Francisco. She is backed by radical Maoists. She has worked with radical Maoists, pro-Chinese communists, her entire political career. They got her elected as DA in San Francisco, Attorney General from California, Senator from California, and they got her on the Democratic Party ticket. She is as communist as Hugo Chavez or Fidel Castro, and my 392-page book, full of references and illustrations and archival research, which you can get on Amazon. It's called Stealth Kamala Harris's Communist Roots, because she's a stealth communist candidate. She is 100% on board with China's agenda, and she will open the borders. She will legalize 40 million illegal immigrants. She will destroy the military. She will end the Electoral College. She will basically bring communism to America. That she is there to finish the job that Obama started.
And also end the filibuster. And it seems to me, I mean, you know, I'm open to all kinds of opinions, both sides of the political, right. But here's what I'm saying. I'm open to both sides of the political conversation, but common sense rules that, you know, we may not like everything Donald Trump has done, but from my pocketbook and many other people who are listening, I'm not trying to convince people. I mean, your scholarly work, hopefully, and it does help big time to give people the reality to open our mind. But here's what I'm saying. That with all these issues that are going on, a new way forward, a person who never got one campaign electoral vote, I guess, in anything, I would simply believe that she would be just another puppeteer from the puppeteer, Barack Obama, to continue him in the background just so she can smile and laugh. I mean, she has no substance, in my opinion, no platform. I'm preaching to the choir here. And then lastly, I wanted to get the take on the most ridiculous candidate that I've ever seen in my life, that of Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. I mean, there's something seriously wrong, in my opinion, with a guy like that, who I think really doesn't understand. How could he let his city burn? And he and his wife thought that that was something interesting to do and never stop the riots. I mean, how could people be so foolish, Trevor? Seriously, what, am I dreaming here?
Well, no. This is the thing is Kamala Harris comes from the same Maoist machine that gave us Barack Obama. She was supposed to be the female Barack Obama, but she's not as smart or as charming as Obama. But that doesn't matter, because who will be running the Harris administration will be Barack Obama and Xi Jinping of China. She will be their puppet. And Tim Walz will be her puppet, because Tim Walz is also deeply in bed with Communist China and the Communist Party of Minnesota and a whole bunch of radical organizations in Minnesota. He is a 100% pro-Chinese Maoist, just like she is. And if people are not sure what Maoism is, that's the Chinese variation of communism. You know, they had the Soviet communism. The Chinese brand is called Maoism, after Mao Zedong, and she was brought up in that. She thinks like that. Her slogans come from the Maoist movement. She's following Maoist policies, and the pro-Chinese voter registration organizations like Lucha in Arizona, which got, you know, the claim to have won your state in 2020 and 2022, you know, they knocked on, they made 1.8 million phone calls and knocked on 1 million doors. You know, you've got all these Chinese-backed voter registration organizations in all the key swing states working with Black Lives Matter, which is another Chinese operation, to swing the election in the direction that China wants. Because their goal, by legalizing 40 million illegal immigrants, is to create a one-party state that can never be overturned, controlled by China. And Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are going to do that job if they're given the chance. That's how critical this is. And my book, I stand by this. I didn't call her a liberal. I didn't call her a socialist. I didn't call her a progressive. I called her a communist, because that's exactly what she is. She's never been anything else in her entire life.
Trevor, as we almost conclude our interview, I wish we had more time, and likewise, hope we do this again in a positive way.
Yeah, happy to, Steve.
No, I appreciate it. But here, I got to go back. We're on WABC here in New York, a vast number of people listening, 8 million population, one of the largest cities on the planet. But let's talk a little bit about the litany of woes for some of those legislators that are in the New York area. Not only Mayor Adams, Governor Hochul. Who else can you give us that also for the New York audience? I mean, I could list a whole bunch, but I'd rather hear it from you, the man who's done research on the whole government side of New York State.
Yeah, look, I've written several books, which are also available on Amazon, about the senators and Congress members. But like Jerry Nadler, for instance, is a Marxist, a hardcore Marxist from Democratic Socialists of America, but chairman of the Judiciary Committee. Chuck Schumer has deep ties to an Iranian political action committee. He courts the Jewish vote, but he has deep ties to an Iranian political action committee. AOC obviously is a Marxist, but member of Democratic Socialists of America. Nadia Velasquez has got deep ties to the Communist Party and Democratic Socialists of America. Grace Meng from Queens is deeply in bed with the Chinese Communist Party and Korean radicals, pro-North Korean radicals, and Asian Americans Asian Americans for Equality, which was a front for the old Communist Workers' Party. The former Jose Serrano was deeply in bed with Hugo Chavez, etc. Greg Meeks is deeply in bed with Venezuelan and Cuban communists. I could just about name the whole Democratic delegation. Kirsten Gillibrand is also very, very involved with the pro-Chinese outfit Asian Americans for Equality. So, and that doesn't even talk about your city council, which is chock full of Marxists, and your city administration. Right back from David Dinkins, who was a Marxist, who wrecked New York, right up to the previous mayor, de Blasio, who was also a Marxist. New York has suffered extensively through having Marxist administrators who are very soft on crime and don't discipline people, and your Marxist senators and Marxist Congress members. New York is a big communist center. I'm sure most New Yorkers don't understand that, but most of your New York Congress members have Marxist ties on the Democratic side, a vast majority of them.
And you don't make this stuff up, obviously, through extensive research. Look, folks, I've known this man for many years. I call him a friend. We don't talk a lot, but obviously I support many of the things. His research, his ability to open our minds to what he sees, not just some little scribble on the internet. His is based with all documentation, footnotes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to get in touch with you, Trevor, where do they go? TrevorLoudon.com? Is that the easiest way for them to get to you? Yes.
Yeah, you can see my books and DVDs on TrevorLoudon.com. But if you want a book really quickly, just put my name in Amazon and especially get the Kamala Harris book, Stealth Kamala Harris's Communist Roots, because it will blow you away. I promise you that. 392 pages of Tim Walz's and Kamala Harris's communism. Absolutely rock solid case.
No, that's an amazing interview. And Trevor, it's been a long time in coming. As I said, we'll do this again. And let me ask you finally, what can people do out there? Yeah, what can people do? This is something serious. What do we do to help save
the immediate task? Yeah, the immediate task now. See, it's got to be too big to rig. I'm supporting President Trump. I want him to win the White House, win the Senate, but also hold the House. So every patriot in New York has to vote, because there's 3 or 4 seats in New York, congressional seats, that could go either way. Trump, the Republicans won 2 or 3 of them last time. They're in doubt. Everybody's got to go. Every patriot's got to vote in the congressional races and the presidential race. Absolutely. That is your number one priority right now. And then we'll talk about what we do next after the election.
Absolutely. Trevor Loudon, thank you so much for your time. Stay on the line as we go to the hard break at the bottom of the hour. I want to thank our producer, Richard Dugan, Dr. D, for performing the duties to make this show sound as good as it should, so everybody within the sound of Talk Radio 77 WABC can hear the opinions not only of myself, more importantly, those of great guests. Normally the science program with astronomy, space, aviation, and weather, celebrities, and then also in the music genre. But we never forget the reason that we're here: truth, justice, and the American way, stories of American exceptionalism. Trevor Loudon, Godspeed, God love you, and God love this country. I do appreciate your time. TrevorLoudon.com, and his books available on Amazon.com. Thank you, Trevor Loudon.
Thank you so much, Steve, and thanks to the listeners.